Captain's log, stardate 49655.2. Our sensors have located a variety of flour which may prove to be a valuable nutritional supplement. I have sent Mr. Neelix and Mr. Tuvok to collect samples. And I'm sure nothing could possibly go wrong. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of HoM Star Trek podcast. This week, we are diving into one of Voyager's most thought-provoking moral dilemmas, the infamous episode Tuvix, as we continue our series of some would regard them as bad episodes, some simply controversial, some divisive, and some just episodes that prompt an awful lot of discussion, as in this case. I am your regular host, Captain Mike, and today I am joined by two returning guests, the ever-insightful Lady Vean. Hello.
Hey. Excited to talk about this misogynist dog whistle.
Oh, starting well there, straight out of the gate. We've lost a solid 40% of our viewership right now. I'm sure. At least I hope so, because the viewers I probably don't want anyway. So never mind. Yeah, it's an episode for sure. It can reveal an awful lot. But yeah, welcome back. You were just on another Voyager episode review not long ago, just a few weeks back for Threshold. So safe to say we probably end up thinking this episode's got to be better than that. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
You know what, Tuvix? It's a really interesting episode if we can separate it from, as I was saying, the misogynistic element.
Yeah, or just the sheer amount of stupid debate that can't seem to be held in any kind of decent fashion. But again, I'll get into that later. I'm joined by a second guest, another returning guest, kind of, though it has been a while, to the point that we don't actually remember the last episode that we reviewed together. But please welcome back anyway, Sandy Eavenson. Welcome.
Hello. I admit, though, I feel as though I've been dragged before the Numerian Inquisition.
Yes, just a nice, easy episode to settle you in. No huge moral and ethical dilemmas to discuss or anything.
It's a super profound episode, though. I'm excited to get into it too.
Oh, it is definitely. It's that's what I mean. It would be such a nice thing to talk about if it wasn't for the fact that like the fandom en masse just doesn't seem capable of doing it without descending into rabid chaos. But anyway, hopefully that won't happen here. So fingers crossed. And if you were going to tune out as soon as you heard Tuvix, is the episode title, then please stick around. We're hopefully not going to devolve quite into that level. Hopefully I won't be misogynistically dog whistling myself, at least. So we three together are going to review the episode, and of course, as we've already kind of alluded to quite heavily, we're going to have to tackle the ethical trolley problem that left Janeway with an impossible choice. Was she right to separate Tuvok and Neelix, or separate back into them rather, or did she cross a line? And before we go boldly into that debate, because that's going to be tough, we're going to ease into it with a little banter and a little bit of an introduction in the section that I call Hailing Frequencies Open.
Hailing frequencies open, sir.
So, what I have been doing this series to kind of fit the theme is just go around and ask if there's any kind of episodes that you would say are episodes that are bad or not particularly appealing to you, and then ask, I think, the flip side of that, is there any episode that you feel is unfairly maligned? And I believe I already asked you both of those questions, Vean, last time you were on, yeah?
Yeah, you did. And I mentioned the fight, of course, being, in my opinion, probably the worst episode of Star Trek of all time. But again, they're contenders. Go to Sandy and let me think for a second.
No problem. Well, I was going to go to Sandy because we haven't actually approached you, first of all, for even the first section. So firstly, Sandy, my question would be, is there anything that you particularly dislike or have a violent, kind of strong repulsion against, maybe in the Star Trek universe? There's a lot of episodes, so I think it's perhaps there's going to be one or two that you don't react to.
Yeah, and it's, of course, going to be hard to recall any by title now, but because you did recently review Sub Rosa, I do remember how just uncomfortable and gross I felt that whole episode was. And when I saw it come up, I on purpose was quiet when you asked for people. I mean,
you tremendous prude. Don't tell me you've never fallen asleep reading a particularly erotic chapter in your grandmother's diary.
I wouldn't read my grandmother's diary, I think. And it's certainly got evocative elements, like, for example, the Mayfair, which is, kind of uses an element of that to greater effect, but the whole and a lot of Wesley stuff, I guess, even though The Next Generation, I have always quoted it as my favorite Star Trek, but more because of nostalgia and because, I was growing up at that time that I was watching it. But it has most of the stinkers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I would always say it's my favorite of the series because the highs outrank the lows. But oh boy, those lows are still there. They are still bad. Yeah, yeah. As I say, we'll get into more of that later. I don't want to spoil too much of what might be coming up in future, so I'm not going to give huge lists of things that I detest or whatever. But so yeah, Sandy, we may as well ask you the next question while Vean's gathering her thoughts. Is there anything that you think is perhaps unfairly maligned by the fandom, at large, that you think has an unfair reputation as bad?
And, I don't have a great answer for this either, mostly because I don't get into a lot of the debate because I end up leaving angry. So I just kind of stay away from it. In fact, even when doing some, looking around for people's thoughts on this episode, I found where it was posted like 13 years ago in a philosophy sub on Reddit instead of the Star Trek. So we got a whole different, viewpoint there. Some people who hadn't even seen the episode and were just debating the moralistic relativity of the whole thing. And I found that inside a lot better. I think, though, things that are mostly universally, like things that you say you don't like, when it comes to the Star Trek episodes or the things that we talk about on Discord, I pretty much am just in agreement with. Nothing that I would fight anybody over.
Yeah, fair enough. It's just I wasn't sure. Sometimes you hear,
Yeah.
that, I don't know, major publications, reviewers, or fan groups don't like a particular thing, and sometimes it baffles me. I can say it without spoilers because the episode will have gone out that both me and GK reviewed Move Along Home from DS9 as 3.5 stars, and we're just like, why does this have a reputation as one of the worst episodes? I mean, it's filler, and it's not one of the greatest episodes, but it's not terrible by any means. So,
which episode was that? I would say that the ones I find most boring that I know a lot of people liked was when in DS9 when they had Earth episodes, episodes where they were on Earth. I found those the most boring, and I know
seriously.
Yeah, and I know that can be a little controversial because I think we've even had this discussion before, very lightly and briefly. That I knew that you liked a lot of the baseball, episodes and stuff like that.
Oh, no, not so much that, but I'm just thinking as you mentioned episodes on Earth, the first thing that springs to mind is Homefront and Paradise Lost, which I think are two of the best DS9 episodes, when it's kind of, they're declaring martial law on Earth or considering it, and there's an admiral that wants to go too far with that, and they're all paranoid that the changelings have infiltrated, and then one of them reveals there's only actually two of us on Earth, and it gets into a whole thing about authoritarianism for a while there.
And I found that a little bit boring, and even like an Enterprise when they we're looking at that alternate timeline with the Nazis. I found that boring as well.
Oh, to be fair, that episode was pretty bad. Yeah, that was an episode that came about entirely because they wanted to end season 3 on a cliffhanger so they didn't get cancelled, and then we're like, I've got it, alien in a Nazi uniform. Then somebody had to write a 2-part episode around that random idea. So anyway, but no, I mean, I dislike some of the early DS9s, but Move Along Home is the episode where the Gamma Quadrant species have their own game, and it's kind of like, 1990s future version of an escape room. Bashir, Dax, Cisco, and Kira get transported to this area, and they have to copy the kids' rhyme and hopscotch, and then get out of being poisoned by drinking some wine and bits and pieces like that. I mean, the production values are what lets it down, but I really do not think it's a terrible or egregious episode by any means. So, but you never know. Vean may disagree. So I'll come back to you now, Vean, and ask, have you had a chance to think of anything else that you wanted to shout out from that?
Yeah, so many of the ones, we've already talked about. That's the thing for me. But I was just thinking, Any of the mirror episodes, I absolutely detest. I think, especially with Deep Space Nine and Enterprise, but Deep Space Nine in particular, they were very blatant rating grabs. You know, where we can have these women dress a certain way that's going to get that they couldn't traditionally make them do because it would be out of character. So let's make them raging, promiscuous bisexuals, as well as and we discussed this in another episode in the Pale Moonlight, but the introduction of Section 31, I think, not as a singular episode, but I think just the concept is a spit in the face to, and I hate to say Roddenberry's vision, but Roddenberry's vision. So
I mean, just
think,
Star Trek in general, but I mean,
yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So
it's one of those things that I kind of put my finger on part of where it might have come from, because I happened randomly to have just listened to the new Delta Flyers episode, and it was reviewing The Wire with Andy Robinson, who's a great guest. But it was mentioning like that was the first time they mentioned the Obsidian Order and compared them to like worse than the Tal Shiar, and I was like, oh, that's why they did that, isn't it? It was kind of like every species has to have their own sort of Gestapo secret service, and Starfleet didn't have one. So they just invented it out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh, what a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's so I'm not going to individual episodes, but concepts as a whole that have been used by multiple series at this point that I think are insulting and a mistake.
Incidentally, have you seen any of the Mirror Universe episodes from Discovery?
No.
Okay. I will say that it answers your criticism about the whole using it purely to sexualize people, because it completely changes that aesthetic, but it has its own issues. But I do think they're probably the better Mirror Universe episodes because they actually do interesting stuff with it. It just doesn't necessarily fit the continuity of all the Mirror Universe episodes that have gone before. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing if you don't like all the ones that have come before it anyway. So yeah, you might be more interested in those. I'll just leave it at that. Sure. So, anything else you guys wanted to mention before I move us to the next bit? Or
just that I always used to refer to Mirror Kira as Jazzercise Kira, because that's what she looks like to me.
Oh, the intendant. Oh, but anyway, that's quite enough of the negativity. We'll move. Well, hopefully, we'll see, because we're going to move on to the next section, which is the section that gives the podcast its name, as I always say, and it is the hit or miss section.
What about my performance?
I'm not a drama critic.
And I have 4 things. I've kind of worked out that's the sweet spot from when I've been editing together things from the previous episodes to keep it to. So hopefully it's 4 things that will make sense and that we can give opinions on. I do have a 5th as a backup just in case. But yeah, if you're not familiar, the hit or miss section is just basically where I pick things from anywhere in the Star Trek universe at random, shout them out. We ask our guests whether they think they're a hit or a miss, debate back and forth if necessary, come to some kind of conclusion, because there's 3 of us, so we can work that out, hopefully. And hopefully just have a nice sort of debate-worthy discussion without getting too into it, which we never tend to do. And and there will be some things mixed up in here that will relate to either the episode we're reviewing or just the general theme of overall more divisive Star Trek. So the first thing that I have on the list for the hit or miss section today is very specifically related to the episode that we're reviewing. In a lot of ways, it's a direct sequel to that episode, and I really hope you've both seen it. Hit or miss for the Star Trek Lower Decks episode, Tuvix. And Sandy, I'll come to you first on this one.
I haven't actually seen this.
You haven't seen this one?
I don't think.
Okay, okay. Well, we'll ask Vean, and if she hasn't, we'll just move on. Vean, have you seen this episode?
I have, and it's a miss, and it actually put me off Lower Decks for a while.
Oh, ouch.
It really did, because I have such strong feelings about the Tuvix episode and the way the fandom has responded to it, particularly the way they've responded to Janeway and the treatment of her, and again, that misogyny element, which we'll, I'm sure, talk about. So for Lower Decks, which I've actually really enjoyed, to come on and go, hey, yeah, Janeway's a murderer, like, I can't, I just, like, it was just, it felt to me like it was validating, excuse me, I can't talk today, validating
That's fine.
a lot of really unsavory opinions in the fandom that can actually be very detrimental and hurtful to women. So I watched it and I was like, oh, this is this is not funny. It's not, and I hate to sound like I don't have a sense of humor about things, because I think if the Tuvix episode wasn't such an issue, in terms of the way men talk about women and the way men talk about Janeway and Janeway as a representation of how they feel about women, it felt like it was punching down. And I just didn't enjoy that. So this was a miss for me. And it took me a while to go back and pick up Lower Decks again.
That's fair enough. Do you have any random thoughts? Obviously, I can't really argue with you the way you felt about the kind of the Tuvix plot element, but did you at least respond to the kind of the love letter to Voyager part of the aspect that make up the B plot, when they're kind of on the Voyager as a museum ship and you have the random cameos from other episodes of the kind of what's it called, the macrocosm virus and the holograms?
Oh, right. I forgot. I see. It was so disconcerting. I really forgot about that aspect of it, which was fun. I seem to remember they ended up destroying the ship, basically. Am I wrong?
Well, kind of, yeah, but they realized that it was a kind of humorous callback to a previous episode that often gets ridiculed, but doing it in kind of the right way, because they realized they could use Neelix's cheese to basically, collapse the warp core and the computer systems or whatever it is, the usual techno gubbins. It's like, yeah, he saved the day with cheese. Yeah. Of thing.
I vaguely recall that aspect. I remember them bumping into, like, the guy was weird about it being a pristine museum and they kept bumping into things and knocking things over, which is kind of amusing. But
yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of an annoying, I see your point with the kind of Tuvix part of the element, and element of the episode, I should say, and I kind of agree with you. I almost wish they just hadn't done that part, because you can tell that they clearly love Star Trek Voyager, which is a show that got a lot of criticism when it was on the air, and the parts where it's actually like, look, this was a good show, here's our kind of love letter to moments like that, of even funny little things like they get attacked by the hologram of Chaotica and the overly amorous Michael Sullivan from Fairhaven, and then randomly the clown from the Thor, and Boimler quite rightly points out that clown wasn't even a hologram. What's doing it? It's so annoying that they get so much right, but like I said, the Tuvix plot is played. It's very much like, it feels like the writer's kind of Rick and Morty sensibilities coming into play of like, let's just do the most visually weird thing, and it'll be just bizarre, and we're playing with this idea of merging the two life forms, and it just gets stupid. I don't necessarily think it was them decrying Janeway's kind of decision, as it were. I can see what you mean, but I don't think you could really come away with the takeaway that she's a murderer, considering that they basically decide to do the same thing en masse with the entire USS Cerritos at the end, and nobody's like, well, that was questionable. And I know they tried to get around it by having to Lynn be like, yeah, but by this point we've already accidentally created this huge mass, monstrous thing, so it's fine what we're doing. It's kind of like they kind of realized themselves they were basically in a no-win situation, and so I don't see it necessarily as being disrespectful towards that, but it just comes off as stupid. And like I said, just too kind of like adult cartoon, look how zany we can be, which it's never the best when the Trek cartoons kind of go on that level. But I would still probably call the episode overall a hit, because like I said, I like the Voyager B plot with the guys on the ship and sort of going through an almost kind of best of Voyager. And I like that it's the episode where kind of Mariner reveals that she's put Boimler forward for promotion, and that's when they end up all getting promoted to lieutenant at the end because they've saved the day and stuff. But yeah, the Tuvix part of the episode is easily the worst part, so it's a shame that that's what it was named for. I certainly wouldn't disagree with you if we're going to clash more on one hit and one miss, to put it in the miss column because of that aspect, because whether it's for the same reasons or not, I just think that sucks. So anyway, sorry if we spoiled that for you, Sandy, if you're not a Lower Decks viewer or fan.
Quite all right. I'm sure I'll forget it all by the time I get around to it.
I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory anyway. It's not like I was spoiling a great, oh, wow, what a shock. This might be another one that we may have to move straight on from, because I have a horrible inkling that neither one of you will have seen this. Although you could potentially go off aesthetics, because if you know me, as I always say, that I always like to include ships, and we're starting to get a little bit, left field with these now, because I'm running out of the obvious ones. And this was a ship that turned up in Discovery Season 5. So fingers crossed, at least one of you has seen it. Hit or miss for the USS Antares from the 32nd century. Sandy, come on.
I have, yes, I'm all caught up on Discovery. Woo! No worries there. Um, and I do remember thinking that it was pretty cool how it moved and how everything moved together. I trying to remember what its this was the one that was found in that pocket.
No, the Antares it's from the first couple of episodes. It was Rayner's ship before he gets demoted to First Officer of Discovery. So it's the kind of the ship that they initially meet on the run to find Locke and Mal. We run into it for the first time because he's got Locke and Mal ship and a tractor beam while Burnham's kind of on the hull of the other ship, and he won't kind of let them go. And then there's this whole other thing about they need to use both ship shields to stop an avalanche that the bad guys have started and stuff. So does that jog your memory anyway?
It does jog my memory. I'm trying to remember it in motion because those other smaller parts were part of the ship and kind of ran in tandem, like tractor beamed to it.
It's kind of, it's like the other 32nd century designs in that the warp nacelles are detached, but it's basically supposed to just be a ship which has 4 warp nacelles. They just don't have struts, so they're kind of free floating behind the ship.
Yeah, and how that's revolutionary thinking, kind of what Discovery's whole premise was taking Star Trek into this new generation, of fans, and it's science fiction at its best, right? So I think it's a hit. I like it very much, and aesthetically very pleasing to the eye, but it was very forward thinking, how that ship moved and worked.
Yeah, I wish we'd done a little bit more of it, but I'll give my thoughts in a second if we wait and see if Vean has any thoughts on this one. Vean, over to you.
Well, excuse me. I haven't seen the episode, but I'm just looking at it, and that's a wild design. I think it's a really cool looking design, but my first thought is like, well, what if you need to work on the nacelles, or if you need to get you having a beam from part of the ship to part of the ship?
They all have personal transporters in the 32nd century, which they used to just beam place to place constantly anyway, so it's not really an issue.
Wow, how come they're not all fat then? I mean,
don't
you need to walk?
That's every crazy. Time when I was watching season 4 and 5 of Discovery, every time it's like Burnham to engineering and she just beams straight there, I'm like, she should be huge by now. She's getting no exercise. Come on.
That is bonkers to me. I don't know. I can't say either way, having not seen it, but that seems very bizarre.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people just really are not on board with the detached nacelles thing, and it was one of the things that they did just to kind of make it futuristic, because you have to do something to point out that, we're in the 32nd century, we're 800 years more advanced than anything we've really seen before. So how do you signify that while still not having it just be like, well, this looks nothing like a Starfleet ship? And that was the big thing they went with, was like, for improved maneuverability, our nacelles are no longer attached. And like I said, it's one of those things that proved very divisive. You're either on board with it and kind of very much like myself and Sandy and just think like, well, it's futuristic, that whole Arthur C. Clarke quote, anything significantly advanced would appear like magic. So maybe we just don't get it because we're hundreds of years removed. And all right, at least it looks kind of cool. And a lot of other people that were just like, how would it improve your maneuverability? It's nonsense. You can't repair the nacelles. They're not attached to your ship. So what happens if the saucer and nacelles go off in different directions or whatever? And it's like, all right, if you're going to apply logic to this, I guess, then it's not going to work. But yeah, so anyway, what were your thoughts on the Antares specifically as a ship then? Would you say it's a hit just based on, I'm guessing you haven't, obviously you said you haven't seen the episode, so you haven't seen it in motion, but what do you think based on this image?
I know that my first impression was what you were just saying, those logical people were saying. It was like, well, what if you need to work on the nacelle? So for me, I get that it's futuristic, and as you said, it's trying to, visually demonstrate that it's 800 years in the future. So what can we do different? For me, I'm gonna say this is probably a miss, but I not like I hate it. I just don't think it works.
That's fair enough. You'd probably feel the same way about a lot of the Discovery future ships in that case, though not necessarily all of them. But so yeah, I actually really like this. It's I should have said up top, but I didn't really want to color any opinions. It's actually a kit bash of 2 different 32nd century designs that had appeared a couple of seasons before. So it's the saucer from one of them and the 4 nacelles from a different one, which have just been stuck together. And somehow I think it works. And actually, looks better than either one of the things that make up its constituent parts. You can't really see it on the image, but one other thing that might prove controversial is that the saucer basically has like loads of empty space. It's kind of like a ring almost. So it has that Discovery thing where there's like blank space in the saucer section, which a lot of people I think have real problems with for some reason. Never understood why myself. It's a design thing, you know. It's not a big deal, but yeah. So knowing that, does that change any of your opinions, Vean or Sandy?
No, I think I stand by mine.
Same.
Okay. So, well, we're probably going to say hit just because I think Sandy would probably came down on you being on the side of hit for this one.
I did say hit, yeah.
Cool. The next thing is an episode that I've had just on the hit or miss list for ages, and I have no idea why it first occurred to me. It may have just been an episode I caught at random on TV and thought, oh, I'd love to know people's opinions on this. Or maybe it's an episode you think belongs in this season looking at trash. We'll soon find out. Hit or miss for the Star Trek Enterprise episode, Bound. Hopefully, again, we've all seen this. Vean, I'm going to try you first on this one. Have you seen this episode and what are your thoughts?
I don't think I have seen it, or at least not the whole thing. As you know, I don't care for Enterprise.
Right.
And just looking at the image you've selected, I can tell that I would have problems with this episode. So
I was kind of, yeah, the images, I should clarify for anyone that's listening and not watching. I always put an image up on YouTube on the kind of visual version of the podcast for our guests and for anyone that's watching there. And it's kind of one of those things where obviously the episode revolves, if you know it, around quote unquote Orion slave girls. So there's an awful lot of, shall we say, exploitative dress and dancing and things. But the episode tries to buy it back by having the big revelation at the end of the episode that the women of Orion are not slaves. They're using their pheromones to enslave the men. And it's just so weird. And it changes the like multiple things in the Trek universe, and it just comes out of nowhere and feels like, yeah, I kind of get what you were trying, but what? Yeah, anyway, what about you, Sandy? Have you seen this and do you have any thoughts on it?
I have seen it, and I did have to quickly run through the plot just to refresh my memory.
That's why I was doing it for anyone, because a lot of people that watching might be like, well, I think I've seen that, but I can't remember. So I've kind of, spoiler alert, I kind of spoiled the big shock ending, which was, oh, the women are not the slaves at all. That's what you've thought for 50 years, but you're wrong. Anyway.
And for me, I recalled that it was a miss. Anytime anyone on the ship was kind of under influence and not themselves, because Tucker I really liked a lot. Anytime they were not themselves, it was always felt like a waste of an episode to me. So I do would say, if memory serves, that this one was a miss for me.
Fair enough. I think we're going to come down on the side of a miss then. Like I said, I think I get what they were going for, but you can't buy back this kind of exploitation of women by at the end going, no, they were the ones in charge the whole time, because you've still done the whole, like, you know, leering and male gaze point of view and had them do the, you know, sexy dancing and everything in the episode. So it just felt very like, I don't feel comfortable.
Well, especially, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but especially with the Enterprise era of Star Trek, I mean, and the way they like, one of the things that made me not watch Enterprise was how male gazy it was right from the start. Like with T'Pol and her cat suit. Like, can we not have somebody in a cat suit? Does there always have to be with her Angelina Jolie lips and her cat suit and then the decompression chamber where they're all
the decon chamber thing is unforgivable. Yeah,
all of that. So I already was like, you know, Enterprise was on my shit list for that already. So, and then they want to do something like this, and like you say at the end, go, oh well, actually we're empowered, yay! And it's like, but you're not though. And I know that's ironic coming from me, but yeah, it's just the later years of Voyager and into Enterprise were very exploitive, and I take a lot of issue with that. So
yeah, some certain things definitely were, and like I said, it's a shame because there's almost the nugget of an interesting idea. If they hadn't just, like I said, they ruin it with just doing all the things that they try to subvert at the very end anyway. And then, like Sandy said, it's doing that whole plot of like the whole crew are acting totally out of character because they've been, you know, lured in by these girls' pheromones, poison ivy style or something, and it's just like, what are we doing? You know, honestly. As a random bit of trivia side note, by the way, the lead Orion in this picture was played by Saya Baten, who was one of the actresses who played Zial. I think the first actress who played Zial on DS9. So you deserved better, my dear. I'll tell you that much. So I don't know why I know random bits of trivia like that. It's because in case anyone ever launches into a Trek quiz, I'm always going to be prepared. I have to know these things. So the fourth and potentially final. Oh yeah, you're always going to want to be on my team on a Trek quiz. Jeez. I can create my own. I'm hoping this is a character that we were all familiar enough with, who again, I'm just interested in what we all think of, mainly because I'm in two very minds when it comes to it. But anyway, hit or miss then for the last thing, hopefully, for the character of Laan Noonien Singh from Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Vean, are you familiar with this person?
Does she pilot the ship?
No.
No, that's Ortega. Okay, then no. I'm not familiar.
Okay. No. Laan is the security officer of the Enterprise at that particular time.
But she's related to Khan?
She's related to Khan Noonien.
Yeah, no, sorry, no. I cannot with all this. It's like bad fan fiction. Somebody has to be related to this person who has 3 siblings you've never heard about in 50 years, and then can you just stand on your own? Can you make something that stands on its own merits without having to have a built-in audience that you're tying it into? Just do your own thing.
Are you ready for me to make it so much worse for you?
Yes, go ahead.
Not only is she related to Khan Noonien Singh, she has a torrid, passionate relationship with James Kirk.
Oh yeah, of course.
Who, by the way, had not heard of Khan Singh, despite apparently having a relationship with his ancestor, who has the same surname. But anyway,
on her own, though, she's pretty awesome, though, as a person herself.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's where I'm in two minds. Is that I really wish they'd just given the character a different name. The actress and everything that the character does are so good, but it's bogged down by this stupid idea, and they don't even do anything with it. Of like, I'm related to Khan Noonien Singh, so sometimes I feel like I'm being pressured and I'm a monster. And then in like episode 3, they're like, "No, we've scanned your DNA. There's no residual traces. You're not genetically engineered or anything. You're just a person who happens to have a really bad surname." I was like, "Well, change it then." For God's sake. It's not like you'd be walking around in modern parlance calling yourself, "Oh, well, foolishly, I am called Michael Hitler and I just decided to own it." You know, you wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't. Anyway, that was my rant over with. Sandy, back to you. What do you like about the character anyway?
I just liked her strength in general. That is just a really good, this is where Discovery was trying to, do better than what they had.
Where Strange New Worlds was doing better, you think? Then sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Strange New Worlds was, doing better than Star Trek had done in the past with its female characters.
Yeah.
And it did. I'm okay with her having that. First of all, I love callbacks, which is something that does frustrate me about Lower Decks. I feel like I have to rewatch everything again. I want to get them all. So, the fact that I could, point at the screen and say, "Oh, I know who she's related to." And it did complicate her character because it wasn't her fault, what she was born with. She didn't choose it, but it did, throw into jeopardy her role in Starfleet and what she thought she might be capable of herself. It gave a lot of complexity to her character. And the actress and the character, I feel, are both hits in my book. I really, really liked the character.
Enough. It just felt to me, and Vean, you may want to close your ears if you ever intend to watch Strange New Worlds, because spoiler alert, it just felt to me really weird that they had a character who was named Noonien Singh and then chose to make a completely different character, the one that's genetically engineered. It was like, what? What are we doing? What are we doing? This doesn't make any sense at all. It gave you a chance to have them bond, I guess. But yeah, it was bizarre. But like you, I think I would still come down on the side of soft hit because representation-wise, she's actually a really good character. She's not ever exploited in that way that we were just criticizing. She's never played for, the feminine angle, even though she gets the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of unrequited love, kind of almost soppy love story with Kirk. I actually, if it wasn't for who those characters are, I actually really like the way it's played. Even her kind of love song in the musical episode was very affecting, mainly because she's a really good singer as well. So like a lot of things about the character work. It's just frustrating that they could take her from like, you know, I'm on the fence with this to massive hit by just literally changing her name, and it would change nothing in the grand scheme of the series, which is a shame. But yeah, I say hit. Like I said, the actress is great. The character is very well defined and well played. Yeah, I just really hope they're going to try and give some explanation as to why in the future, you know, nobody recognizes that name and nobody mentions Khan's ancestors or whatever. Give us something at least. Sorry, Sandy, you were saying.
I was just going to say, and she's just very complicated. She's not perfect, but she's just very intelligent. My only thing that kind of turned me off the character was her hatred for the Gorn. I mean, yeah, they were pretty awful, but she basically would have sacrificed the whole crew, just, you know, with her own decision, just to kill the Gorn, or, you know, make sure, because of her past with them. That's the only thing I found a little unattractive, though not necessarily wrong. But yeah, as a whole, I love the character.
I kind of distance myself from that idea and don't put it on that character because it's just the way the writers have terribly written the Gorn. In that they're not the Gorn, they're the alien from Aliens. And if you'd come up against that, then I would react in the same way that she does, which is just like, we can't let these things out. Jeez, I don't care who asked it that. So again, it's one of those things where I just change the name. It's not a Gorn. You just use that name because you thought the fans would be like, "Oh, we recognize that." But yeah, there's a lot of that in Strange New Worlds, I think, where it's just like, create something new. Don't be afraid.
That's my whole point. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing that and say slight hit for La'an anyway, and hopefully some of the debate may have hit some of our audience where they live, and some of you may relate. Or hey, if you want to disagree, by all means, feel free to hit us up on socials or in the comments, but keep it civil. He said before going into a review of this particular episode, because oh boy, this is the episode Tuvix, as I mentioned, and we're going to have to get into a lot of complicated areas potentially here. So I will take a deep breath first of all and tell you that we're going to begin our analysis of the episode. Whew. And before we get into it, we have this thing that we've been doing. If you've been a regular listener for the last two series, you'll know this. An idea that I borrowed or stole completely from the Delta Flyers podcast is that I've been trying to put the plots of these episodes into poetry form and give you a limerick and a haiku that sums up each episode. Because, you know, I have two guests here, it's up to the two of you to hopefully come to some consensus, because if you both give different answers, I don't know what I'm going to do. So which one would you like to hear first, limerick or haiku? And I'll give the other one at the end of the review.
Haiku.
Okay. Cool. Well, my haiku for Tuvix is relatively, you know, straightforward, because there's not much you can do with 5, 7, and 5 syllables. And it simply goes as thus. Tuvok and Neelix, an accident combines them. Tuvix wants to live. That was it. Simple and effective. I think it gets the point across about the episode. So, yeah, I'll come back with the limerick at the end of the review. Hopefully that'll be a little bit more, you know, humorous and a little bit more in-depth. But before we get into the review, I always like to start off, again, as you'll know if you're a regular listener, by asking our guests, and I'll give my thoughts as well, what your first experience was with Tuvix. Can you remember the first time you saw this episode and what your initial reactions were just on a personal level when it finished? And Vean, I'm interested to come to you first and ask your opinion on this one.
Well, yeah, because, you know, I watched, Voyager in real time in the 90s when I was a teenager. And I do remember this episode. And I remember, as Mike and I were actually discussing this a little bit before we started recording, is what a creep Tuvix was. Like, that was really my takeaway, was like, I was not sorry that she killed him at the end, you know, and I'm saying killed in the colloquial sense. I don't think it was, oh, she killed him, she's a murderer. But I remember it was the right thing to do then. It was the right thing to do now. But on top of that, I just remember thinking, I just don't like this guy. Like, maybe he was a better chef and maybe he was a better security officer, but he was a yucky person. Especially,
Kes, definitely, yeah.
That scene with Kes left a really bad taste in my mouth. And I just don't think I ever dreamed that this was going to be the controversial episode that it has become in fandom spaces. I used to actually videotape them on the VHS tapes and watch over. And I don't think I ever really went back and watched this one a bunch of times like I did with some of the other episodes. Not because I thought it was a bad episode or a boring episode, but because he just set my teeth on edge.
That's a weird takeaway, I have to say. I don't think I'm going to necessarily fully agree with you on that one, but we'll get into it a bit later. I do think you're right about the way he treats Kes, which is very, from modern eyes, very iffy. But I can kind of get why he was kind of more beloved by the rest of the crew. And I think the actor does a good job portraying this kind of likable character with a life of his own who's got elements of Tuvok and Neelix and yet is both and neither, which is a complicated thing to get your head around. But again, I don't want to get too far into that. Before I ask you, Sandy, what were your initial thoughts on the episode?
I remember thinking, that it was going to be just another silly episode, and it was gonna. I knew they were going to be separated in the end, and it was just going to resolve. But it wasn't until time came to do it, they figured out how to do it, and it's like the whole tone of the show changed, because he was Tuvok with intuition and a bit of merriment, and he was Neelix, but a bit more skillful and a bit more thoughtful and deliberate. And I loved the character of Tuvix. It really wasn't until he was facing his own death that he did kind of get a little creepy with oh my gosh.
Kes.
With Kes, because he was desperate at that point. But he was, prior to that, giving her space. And while Tuvix, loved her, he was holding back because he saw how conflicted and uncomfortable she was. And he was thinking she would come, to it in her own time. So I was just remember being so surprised with the complexity, how I was left feeling afterwards, how, like the doctor said, she did essentially have to murder Tuvix, but was that the right choice or not? In my opinion, yes and no, for both, for many reasons. When it comes down to, you have this one, if we're talking about purely ethics, this is the life in front of you. And, you are having to extinguish this life to bring to previously already, Tuvok and Neelix were gone. They had died in this transporter accident, and now you have this new being. It was taking away, it was a willful act of taking away that life. However, thinking of it on terms of the people that knew and loved Tuvok and Neelix, if that was my daughter, if that was my mother, if that was my father, no question. And even Janeway didn't even believe didn't even know that she was making the right choice or not. She just, I think Kes is the one that pushed her. I think she was totally conflicted, and she was thinking, for my own selfish reasons, I would love my friend Tuvok back, because they know each other for many, many, many years before Voyager. And she wasn't willing to make this decision based on her own, because that's just the kind of captain Janeway was. She was not selfish. And just, I think Kes is the one that kind of pushed her one way or the other. And you could see even after the act, I think she was glad she did it, but she was still conflicted. You could see it in her face, which was just great acting.
I don't think she was conflicted. I think she was very resolute what she had to do, but I think she was haunted by it. And that's one of the things that I kind of alluded to before we started recording, is that I really wish that kind of 90s episodic television didn't do the thing where everything resets, because this would have long-lasting psychological effects on Janeway for what she had to do, and it would have been nice to
Tuvok and Neelix, because they would have still had all. And that's one thing I would have loved to explore more, is how that clearly afterwards they were super happy to be back. Like she said, she had to be the voice of the two people who didn't have voices in this whole thing, and he's sitting there saying, "I'm the two voice. I am." Oh my gosh! And so just what this brought us to and what we thought about. And I think we're going back to Roddenberry's vision, whether the end result was something Roddenberry would have written or not. The debate is.
I mean, he did. He literally did when he split Kirk. I mean, I don't think he wrote that episode, but when he split Kirk into the good and evil, and then fair enough, you have the the Deus Ex Machina of like, well, they can't live independently, so they have to remerge. But
okay, but
it's effectively the same thing. I mean,
I have to jump in here because we've used the word selfish a couple of times. It's come up, and this person is selfish, and this person's not selfish, and that was my takeaway the first time I saw this episode. I remember when Tuvix said, "I don't want to die," and I remember thinking, "What a selfish bastard!" Because the needs of the many. No. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. This has long been established. Tuvok knows that. Neelix knows that. Either one of those characters would easily, it wouldn't even be anything, they would easily give their life in this situation. And
but
for Tuvix to go there and go, oh no, I don't want to die,
One could argue, though, that the crew was served better by their merging.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into different territory. I don't want to get too far too early. I would dispute your point to an extent, Vean, and the episode even addresses that and says that, like, you probably think I'm terribly cowardly, but I just literally don't want to die. I want to live, and I felt like that at times. You know what I mean? When you've been in dangerous situations, or when you've been, terrified that you're about to catch a terrible disease or something. I don't know. But it's understandable. The will to live, the urge to live in humans is a strong thing. You're right,
Mike,
in the regard.
You're saying it, but you're saying it as in the terms of, oh gosh, I don't want to catch a disease and die. That is not the same as going, I'm going to live so these other people don't.
Well,
that
yeah, because
not the same thing.
Well, in his mind, though, like I said, I think it kind of explains that he's like, well, they're not dead; they're here, they're within me. So why would you want to, like, to his point of view, then they're not actually gone. He's just the best of both of them or whatever. And he wants to live because he's there now in the moment. And I don't necessarily blame him for that or consider him, the combined life form as a selfish thing. But I do agree with your point, and I've written it in my kind of critical aspects, in that it's everyone starts behaving out of character because the plot needs to have this moral dilemma. And I wish they'd done, and I get it's only 45 minutes or whatever, so it's kind of hard to do. I wish they'd done a little bit more to justify, as you said, the idea that, like, why is this being so different than what Tuvok or Neelix would have said? Because there is such a level of removal and independence from those two there. And again, that would potentially help you explain it if you were to say that, like, this is a completely new life form, one who, by the way, has not been to Starfleet Academy or served in Starfleet, so wouldn't necessarily have this training of, like, I've got to be prepared to lay down my life. Obviously he's got the memories of Tuvok who went through this and whatever else, but like I said, I want them to get a little bit more into, like, how is this an independent life form? How is this thing different? Because I think that's central to the, he wants to live is your argument that, the other two are still alive within you, and how, explain this a little bit more so I understand it. But like I said, you get the basics of the moral dilemma, and I appreciate that for what it was anyway. So regardless, I want to say just a couple of quick things. First of all, I should have given a disclaimer as we've been talking. It's kind of occurred to me. First of all, I'm not going to get into this ongoing thing. Yes, I'm aware that technically anytime you use the transporter, you could argue that you're being killed or murdered and what comes back is a clone of you. I'm not getting into that, because
I didn't even think of that.
There's a certain subset of fans that are just like, you do realize everybody dies hundreds of times because the transporter tears you apart on a molecular level and what's coming back is a clone. All right, whatever, Okay, Descartes does not want to write Star Trek, just get on with it. It's fiction, shush. And on a similar level, I saw during the course of my research a whole bunch of people that were just like, why don't you just Thomas Riker him? Just create two and then have one live and one separated back. And I'm like, I'm not even going to address how stupid that is, basically. What you've basically done there is take an already existing ethical problem and duplicate it. So that's why they don't just do that. But anyway, regardless of the, the more, let's say we say bullheaded, I'm going to solve this problem solutions, we're not interested in those, all right? We're looking at the ethical side of things. And just to give you my kind of initial thoughts on the episode, it was another one that I think, like you, Vean, I didn't necessarily think it was going to have the reaction that it did. I thought the episode was fine until the very end, and then it turned, and I found it very affecting in terms of the performance that was given by Tom Wright, and as I mentioned already, by Kate Mulgrew, Jennifer Lean, particularly. And I remember thinking at the end, it was a really good episode, and I thought like you, I was watching Voyager as it came out in real time. And so by the end of the episode, I think I thought, oh, well, that started out like it could have been iffy. And by the end, I bet this is going to be considered in circles along with like The Measure of a Man from Next Gen. And we're going to talk about this kind of ethical dilemma that, and it'll be discussed for years. And there'll be so many cool intellectual debates about it. And then that didn't happen. Unfortunately, it quickly, as you sort of said earlier, it became a misogynistic dog whistle, and an awful lot of the male captains wouldn't have done that was used as a stick to beat Janeway with, which so dumb. If you look at any of the crap the male captains have done, they've done worse things morally than this by miles.
And this, I'm sorry, this review is going to make me sound like a joyless feminist buzzkill, but it really has become that in the fan spaces and in reviews. Oh, it's like, well, Janeway's so inconsistent. Janeway did this and she murdered Tuvix. She murdered poor Tuvix. Like, hello, look at the situation she was in. You think Picard would have gotten that ship home? You think Sisko would have? No. Because she is a selfless character. Because she is willing and able to make the decision. She didn't want to kill Tuvix. Look at her face. Look at her face in that photo right there. She didn't want to kill him. She had to. And it was the right thing to do. And she, as the captain, it was her responsibility to do what everybody else couldn't do.
Yeah. Precisely. And I mean, a lot of this is going to be, people are going to be yelling because you come down on one side or the other. And I can justify it in my own head in various ways, in the ways we've already mentioned, but also in the sense that, as Janeway says in the episode, like, okay, Tuvok and Neelix are gone by your logic and you're here already. And it was an accident on their behalf, but it would be more premeditated if we were to separate you back. But the difference to me, or one of the strong differences, is that Tuvok and Neelix have families. You don't. And we've already seen what it does to Kes on a kind of microcosm level, having this weird merged life form who both is and isn't her loved one. It's not fair to put that on, the loved ones of Tuvok and Neelix, who, imagine the ship gets home and you're just like, oh, is my, T'Pel comes out and is my husband alive? Well, kind of.
Yeah. Well, he even says in that episode where he's trying to like get back together with Kes, oh, I could never forget T'Pel. Well,
yeah, exactly.
Dude, yeah. I mean, what are you doing here? Like, okay, if you want to say I'm my own life form now, then go be your own life form. But you don't get to have it both ways. And I just don't think he is a likable character to begin with. I mean, and that's my opinion. First of all, I didn't like the character. I thought he was selfish. I thought he was annoying. I thought he was so you can't say, well, don't kill me because I'm my own life form and I have my own existence. But then he's going and leaning into Tuvok and Neelix's existences as well.
Yeah. When convenient he is. Absolutely. That's kind of the point. Yeah. And
that's one of the things that makes him a creep.
Like you say, even on this is such a nerdy nitpick type level, but even on the level of like he just immediately steps into Tuvok's position and rank and everything. And it's like, you haven't earned that. If you really are trying to argue that you're an independent life form, you can't just waltz into somebody else's job, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he did solve a problem that Tuvok had said would take weeks to solve.
Yeah, but with the only explanation for that being, I had a hunch. Technically speaking, Harry could have solved that problem if he'd be, if he was the one looking at it instead of Tuvok.
Harry
and he still wouldn't have been promoted.
In this mess.
Don't get me started. Poor Harry being in charge of the transporter. He's not even a transporter chief. What's he doing there? Anyway.
He was like, let's try it, after just fixing without running he ran a diagnostic after the thing happened. It's like, oh, Harry.
And everybody wonders why he didn't get promoted.
He did a lot of good things for the ship as well, damn it. Anyway. But no, while we're on the subject of nerdy nitpicks, I want to get this out of the way before I get into my kind of, gubbins that I normally give, which is the explanation given as to why this happened is obviously because of the particular flower that causes the symbiogenesis, because some plants can do that. And, excuse me, the doctor explicitly says that the plant has also fused with their DNA. So why is nothing ever made of this? Like, he says it's not affecting them or whatever, but shouldn't this creature be called, like, Tuvix plant? Because there's 3 distinct things in there. I mean, I know one of them isn't
consciousness. It had no consciousness.
It's still there, though. I mean, if if Tuvix Tuvok and a plant beamed up, and Tuvok came back and his, arms were leaves or whatever, you wouldn't be like, oh, well.
I just wonder why the plant wasn't in the middle of them when they were all...
That was going to be my next point when they separate Tuvok and Neelix. Where does the plant go?
I think it stayed in Neelix. Oh, no, it was in the uniform that he came back in. Did you see that in uniform?
The miraculously duplicated uniform, yeah, because we can't possibly have our main crew members naked. And don't get me started on the lack of any, okay, biologically you merge because biologically plants can do this. How did you come up with a perfectly merged, Neelix and Tuvok Starfleet uniform? It's synthetic. There's nothing that would merge those two together.
In science fiction world, though, the explanation of how this happened, I thought that was pretty good writing. I really liked that, even though, not actually possible, probably.
But it's better science than half of the things we've been looking at.
Yeah, I love it.
I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility, particularly if you're doing a science fiction projection. I believe this a lot more easily than most things. Yeah. Well, exactly. Like I said, it's hand wavy sci-fi technology. So anyway, I'm going to go quickly into a BTS and some things I have. I only have one thing for the behind the scenes, but I have some things about the writing. So I'm going to quickly rattle through these if you guys don't mind. And then if you have any thoughts, you can chime in or kind of share afterwards while I clear my throat. So my only BTS is, during its development, the episode Tuvix was previously known as Untitled Tuvok Neelix, was also called One, a title that was used for a later episode, and it was called Symbiogenesis, which is obviously part of the plot of the episode. The third title, that being Symbiogenesis, was the title that persisted, through the episode's development and shooting before being changed last minute. So, yeah, jumping then into the writing and plot as we start. We kind of already have started talking about that, but I will say the episode and its teleplay were written by Kenneth Biller. The story is credited to Andrew Shepard Price and Mark Gaberman. Though it's described by Biller as high concept, the original story by Price and Gaberman was much more lighthearted and tended towards slapstick. Biller and Braga found the tone of the episode was so akin to a 1960s sitcom, the two of them even wrote a theme song for it. It's Tuvok, it's Neelix, it's two guys in a fix, it's Tuvix. I apologize. I had to do it. It's there. It's anyway. Biller rewrote the episode to focus more on the serious philosophical questions raised by the episode, and especially the inevitable separation of Tuvix back into the series regulars. In Biller's original treatment, Tuvix recognized that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, Vean, and consented to his fissure. However, after a discussion with executive producer Michael Piller, Biller began to, quote, poke at the audience by throwing up roadblocks to the episode's foregone conclusion. First, Tuvix was rewritten to object to the procedure, and then the Doctor's refusal was added to force Captain Janeway to put truth to action. Piller later described Biller as the poet laureate of Star Trek, highlighting his work on Tuvix and the episode Life Signs as examples. There we go. Over 25 years after the episode first aired, the character of Tuvix continues to be a hot-button topic. No, not only because the character was well-liked by most people who aren't Vean, but because of Janeway's decision. John Van Sitters was Viacom CBS's Vice President of Franchise Planning and Star Trek brand development, and in his many discussions with franchise artists and fans, Tuvix continued to be over-indexed for a character that's only made one appearance. Lower Decks showrunner Mike McMahon described the character and his fate as a touchstone for deep lore Trekkies. Voyager novelist Kirsten Beyer defended Janeway's decision as one of two terrible choices. Mohammed Noor wouldn't agree with her decision while unable to call it irrational or immoral. And US Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez skirted the debate, saying, "One thing I learned watching Janeway growing up is how leadership means being responsible for working through dilemmas with no clear answers." Anything there that stands out to any of you guys?
The roadblocks, because those are all points that stood out to me. Yeah, that, like you said, the foregone conclusion, like when I was watching the episode, I was like, well, they're going to be separated in the end. And I thought I would clearly want that, no question. And then questions,
It's a point that I think comes up, so I don't want to get too far into it. In the audience reaction is that somebody says that, like, even if you don't agree with Janeway's decision, for where they were at that point, Voyager's on a mission that needs all of its crew, at their best, and can't afford to lose, both a chef and a security officer, whether or not you get this better version of both, because can't be in two places at once. So just on a sheer personnel level, she kind of has to look at it pragmatically on that one level and be like, we can't afford to lose a body here, So I I guess, respect that argument as well to that point. What was I going to say? So I will say as well that this is not even a particularly new Trek idea, which is another reason why it really surprised me that it got the response it did. I think particularly of the episode, I believe it was Thine Own Self from Next Generation, where the entire B plot is about Troy going in for the command training, and the kind of final test is, can you order a subordinate and friend to just literally go and die to save the ship? Can you order them to their death? And she has to do it, which means that technically speaking, every captain has had to do this anyway. So arguing that it would be nonsense that they would is stupid. It's literally part of the command training, which, people conveniently forget that episode, which I particularly love, but, never mind.
I mean, it's basically the whole Kobayashi Maru thing, where sometimes there is no right answer.
Absolutely. And how you cope with the no-win scenario is the point.
Yeah.
Which, to your point, like you said, Janeway doesn't cope with it by jumping around and skipping and being like, haha, I got to kill someone. It's like, shit, that wasn't very nice. And I have come away from this not feeling particularly great about it, but it had to be done. So, yeah. Just a couple of notes I wanted to mention about the writing. I think it's interesting how they kind of dehumanized Tuvix at first before, embracing him more as a person. So the way that the Doctor only refers to him as the merged humanoid for the first half of the episode, I think is quite telling. I think we've talked about basically everything else. Oh, this is such a nitpick, but when the Doctor thinks he's found a cure for, the situation and he finally has come across it, we see Kim playing clarinet in his quarters and the Doctor contacting him. Why on earth would he contact Kim? Even the chief engineer would make more sense. I know how I'll contact the junior science officer who caused the problem.
They didn't know what they did. They just didn't know what to do with Harry, especially in the early seasons. But that's a character I feel like they just never knew what to do with him, so they had to give him something. Yeah,
but on a pure Starfleet level, what's his role on the ship, and how come he was, like I said, speak to B'Elanna if it's an engineering situation. Don't speak to Harry. Anyway. Again, just little things like when they're playing pool in Sandrines, I found it very on the nose that Tom Paris actually delivers the line, "We've created a monster." Oof, yikes. I mean, I know it's in good fun, but it's very on the nose. I think let's see. I don't agree with, as you kind of already alluded to, the idea that Tuvix basically runs to Kes to appeal to save his life. Because as much as I can believe that, the survival instinct and the will to live might have caused him to act in a sort of selfish way, I refuse to believe that you'd put somebody that you claim to love in that situation. So that was the point where I was like, nah, this I'm not buying on any level. But I do kind of like that Kes was just, she broke down and it was well acted and was kind of like, I'm supposed to advocate for him, but I kind of want you to go ahead and do it. The last point I've made is what I've already said. It would be nice to explore the effect that this had on Tuvok and Neelix, but that was never going to happen. Tuvok gets assimilated by the Borg and forgets about it 1 week later, so I guess we weren't about to discuss this very much. So, yeah. So did you guys have any other thoughts on the writing and the plot then before we move on a little bit?
No additional thoughts from me.
Yeah, I think we've covered it.
Cool. I'll move to the acting then. I've got quite a lot to read out, but I think it's all pertinent to this. First of all, Tom Wright is the guest star of this episode who plays Tuvix. He was cast to lend more credence to a unique new character that consists of equal parts Tuvok and Neelix. Both the director, Cliff Bole, and Wright himself had reservations about the latter's take on the character, and despite a perceived lack of support, Wright still praised the Voyager cast and crew. When contacted by his talent agent, Wright jumped at the opportunity to create a character wholly unique to the Star Trek franchise. When he auditioned for the role of Tuvix, Wright had never seen Star Trek Voyager and was completely unfamiliar with the characterizations of Tuvok and Neelix. Instead, he drew upon his prior experiences with the characters' actors, Tim Russ and Ethan Phillips, to successfully vie for the role. Exec producer Jerry Taylor was pleased with the casting of Wright, marveling at his ability to bring credibility to the prospect of two characters in one. At his part, Wright compared the trials of the heavy makeup and contact lenses to play Tuvix with his previous roles on Creepshow 2 and Tales from the Crypt. And I'm sure if DK was here, he would be cheering right now. And Wright expressed his willingness to revisit Tuvix or even work on any Star Trek again if the opportunity arose. In interviews, he specifically fondly recalled his time working with Jennifer Lean, Kate Mulgrew, and the director Cliff Bole. In a 1997 interview, Wright explained how the episode's dialogue posed a challenge, in that not only did he have to take great care to adhere to the vernacular of Star Trek and not sound too contemporary, but he had to take several days to accommodate to the episode's Treknobabble with the assistance of Robert Duncan McNeil, Tom Paris. Kate Mulgrew also bemoaned the technobabble in the episode when asked by Starlog for her most memorable line thereof. She said, "When did he cease to become an transporter accident and start to be an individual?" Bole heaped praise on the episode's final scene in which Janeway stalks into the corridor outside sickbay after performing the procedure, which restores Tuvok and Neelix. As we mentioned earlier, he extolled, "That last shot I did with Kate as she's walking into the camera, she told the whole story with her face. She gave a great performance. I only asked for a few things. She brought that look and emotion to work with her." In his book, The Meaning of Star Trek, author Thomas Richards also credited Mulgrew in this scene. Richards saw Janeway troubled by her difficult decision between two undesirable options and how she must live with the choice. A death has cast a shadow over the ship, and for the first time in the series, the Federation has put to death one of its own. Again, disagree with that, but okay. In a 96 interview, Robert Picardo reminisced that as the Doctor, he had a substantial amount to do in Tuvix. Picardo would also look back on the episode and the scene in which he countermands the Captain, especially, as a turning point in the Doctor and Janeway's relationship, calling it an interesting moment for both characters. And finally, Ethan Phillips also remembered being excited reading the script for Tuvix, as it was an opportunity to discover more about his character, which I don't think really happened, but there we go. So, I'll take a breath and ask, do you guys have any thoughts on any of the things from the acting that we've touched on there or any elsewhere in our discussions?
Just that end cap scene that you mentioned there at the end with Mulgrew, and I was fascinated to hear how much of that was directing and how much of that was her. Actually, when looking for my picture for this podcast, I was trying to find something from that scene where she was alone in the hallway, because you do see pain cross her face. Well, she was determined walking out. She was determined as she carried out the act.
But it's the stop and pause and the haunted look, like I said, that's just, and to end the episode on that is so brave, I think, as well.
The stop and pause and all that goes across her face, and in the end, like her eyes flutter a little bit and you can almost see her stuff it down, put it away.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to look at in talking about Janeway when she follows him to sickbay and she's got that very stalwart look and then the walk down the hall and the way I think it's akin to the masks we all wear, right? Like, okay, I have to do this odious task. I cannot show what I'm feeling internally because I am the captain here. I cannot let anyone see that I am having doubts about this. I have to put on this mask. And so she does. And then the mask comes off. And then a different one comes. And I think that's something that we all do in our lives. And I think it's seamless. Kate carries the show as she always does. I think it's a seamless performance. Now, unpopular opinion, I don't think Tom Wright, was it? I don't think he gives a particularly good performance, frankly. And I think that might be part of why this character is so fundamentally unlikable to me. I remember even as a kid, I've always been very, I studied acting and things, and I've always been very critical, maybe to my detriment. But I just remember not liking the character and not liking the performance. I think it takes a lot of the things that Neelix has become one of my favorite characters. But when I was younger, I was like, oh, what a clown, you know? So I think it takes a lot of the aspects of things that I don't like about Neelix, the clownishness, the ridiculousness, and it removes all sincerity. Because the sincerity is what made me fall in love with Neelix as a character. And when you remove that, you have someone who's so fundamentally unlikable. And I think the performance reflects that. I think he picked the wrong things to focus on. And I don't think it's a particularly good performance.
I disagree, which obviously I did like the performance, but I think I also disagree because I don't necessarily. One of the criticisms I put down was that I didn't see enough of Neelix in him. I thought he leaned way too heavily towards Tuvok.
Yes, I agree with that. I do.
Yeah, and so it didn't. And I mean, part of it is the unavoidable physicality of, you've cast, a black man to play the role, so naturally you're not going to see the white character come through quite so strongly. Nor do I think you should have. I mean, you're at a foolish situation that you put yourself in where you can't win because you've merged a black and white character, and so you have to decide either way because this is the best situation you could possibly have, is to cast a black actor as opposed to whitewashing or, God forbid, picking a white actor and blacking them up. But yeah, no, I liked Tom Wright's performance. I thought he was very likable, and on an acting level, I really was impressed at the way he could switch between Tuvok and Neelix's mannerisms, especially now learning that he hadn't watched the show and kind of seen that, as I said, with the exception of leaning a bit heavily toward Tuvok. But yeah, I mean, we're just going to disagree on that. We both have our opinions, and yeah, maybe give it another watch and see if you can see anything more. But that's fair enough. Where do you land on that one then, Sandy, anyway?
I did find the character of Tuvix to be very believable and well encompassing both. I actually didn't realize it was a different character back when I first watched it, but I can see it now. I think my first run through of Voyager, I was binging, and I actually thought it was the character that played Tuvok.
I did as well the first time I watched it.
Prosthetics and makeup, which is why it made sense. And then I do have a differing opinion about Neelix. Neelix actually wasn't my favorite character, so I liked that this character was Tuvok with Neelix's affability and charm.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, and I never particularly liked Neelix. I always found him, to your point, way too clownish and kind of silly.
Well, I think if you're going to talk about that, they did that better in, oh God, I can't think of the episode, but the one where Tuvok gets hit with the thing and it makes him regress to a more childlike state.
I think it's just called either regression or repression, that episode.
Yeah, it's something like that. But I think they did that much better in that episode with Tim Russ. Yeah. And I think that was a very, very joyful performance.
I just have a couple of other notes on others for the acting. First of all, Picard was always good value as the kind of crotchety doctor stereotype that he had to play for the first couple of seasons, so that was reliable. And I've already said it off air, but I thought Jennifer Lean did a fantastic job, not least because the episode seemed to try to make way more of a melodrama out of Kess's situation, and it could so easily have fallen into like the thickly laid on, overly soap opera type stuff, and I think she just kept it the right side of human, for want of a better word, and believable, as opposed to just, over the top. Would you guys have any other thoughts on the other actors besides Tom Wright in this episode?
Kess was always sidelined so much throughout that I did enjoy her more in this episode, and was even surprised to see her in the it wasn't the ready room, but their conference room of sorts.
The observation lounge thing, yeah. I think she did go to Janeway's ready room at the end as well, though. So
yeah, she did.
Yeah, so I enjoyed her more in this episode than many of the others for obvious reasons. Like, she was more front and center in this, and her performance was measured but impactful. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, I think Jennifer was lovely in this.
Yeah, it's such a good performance, and like I said, it could easily have went across the line into silly or over the top or soapy, which I always say, and it sounds really unfair to soap operas who aren't always like that, but you get my point. It's kind of like the way an actor would portray something on Days of Our Lives isn't the same way that somebody would portray something on ER, for example. So I think it stayed the right side of that particular dramatic line. Cool. I don't really have much to say about the direction by Cliff Bole that we haven't already talked a little bit about. So I'm just going to open it up and ask if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I think the directing was pretty understated. There's no fingerprints on it, which is not a bad thing.
I see that.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say the same, Sandy?
Yes, I wasn't thinking it, but now that it's said, that's perfect.
Yeah, and I have done, like, on an actor level, I really appreciated the way that he directed a couple of scenes. Firstly, the scene with Tuvix and Kess, even though I don't agree with what's happening in the scene, I think the way that it's lit and the way that it's played is really good. Unfortunately, I think the music lets it down by veering into the kind of melodrama territory. But the scene that I like the most is when Kess goes to discuss the situation with Janeway, and she's obviously kind of supposed to be asleep but not sleeping, so she's in her nightwear. And again, it's the way that the quarters are softly lit, and Kate Mulgrew's performance in that scene of kind of explaining how she's going to have to come to terms with separation from Mark at this point, her boyfriend, and what that means, and the way that whole scene is played by the direction of the way it leans on Kate Mulgrew's face, but also Kess's reactions and stuff. I think very well played. And again, just little things like, obviously, it's central to the episode, but we don't realize. But the way that Tuvok and Neelix kind of clash at the start of the episode, and that ongoing joke about could you be a little bit less like yourself, sorry, and kind of thing. Is like, I don't know if that's direction or if it's the performance, but I wanted to shout it out as interesting and I think necessary. Yeah, that's about it, really. And as you said, the ending I would have praised as being great direction, but I think that's probably 90% Kate Mulgrew's performance, so it wouldn't be fair to put that on anyone else. Cool. I don't have anything else to add about the VFX or the music and sound, but if you guys have anything you wanted to, this is the time to do it.
I think the makeup, the contacts and the makeup and the costuming for Tuvix were impeccable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, actually. Yeah, and again, it was a difficult task to try and meld because you had the Vulcans are a very kind of human-looking species, and Talaxians so weirdly different that what they came up with, I think, was a really good. Again, it could have so easily been ridiculous looking, and it kept it just the right side of believable, if that's possible for an alien. So yeah, any thoughts from you, Sandy?
Not really. I tend not to notice those things unless they're really extraordinary. I'm obviously, though, yes, the makeup was very good in this episode.
Awesome. Well, I'll move on to the next bit then, which is going to be the section that I give the audience and the critics response, and I'll open our subspace communications.
Incoming transmission.
This one may take a little while because what I've been doing this series is starting off by giving a kind of critical response to see potentially if the opinion of these episodes has been colored by the general consensus, and then I have also been asking on social media for just our random audience members' thoughts on the episode. This one got a lot of attention, as you can probably imagine, more than we've had for weeks. So I'm going to try and get through all of this as best as I can. And again, if you guys have any thoughts or you want to agree, disagree, or add anything to this, please feel free to interrupt me anytime. First of all, the critics. Tuvix was well received by fans and critics, earning generally positive reviews. Researchers and critics found Tuvix teeming with technical and philosophical content, including thematic ties to other episodes in the Trek canon, real-world logical and metaphysical ramifications, and scientific concessions. Writer Kenneth Miller said he received a lot of mail regarding Tuvix, and that Janeway's tough decisions in the episode generated a lot of discussion and really moved a lot of people. Director Cliff Bole felt the episode was well accepted, and both he and the producers liked it. Actor Tom Wright explained the episode's popularity, saying it resounded with viewers because it had no outright moralizations or specific good and evil characters. The episode deals with a no-win scenario. Writer Thomas Richards concurred with Wright in agreeing that the episode's frank depiction without any judgments was a significant strength in its favor. In a March 2023 episode of The Ready Room, Tim Russ called Tuvix one of the show's most controversial episodes. In his book Delta Quadrant, David McEntee was impressed by the episode's capacity to rise above its appallingly silly premise. He attributed this to the casting of Tom Wright as Tuvix, whose acting he saw as a guide to the tempo of the episode, keeping it from proceeding too slowly. He gave it 8 out of 10. Wired magazine, however, criticized the episode, saying that although it might have seemed like a great concept, it failed in practice and was, quote, an awkward, embarrassing mess that fails to land any of the deeper points it so desperately wants to make. Ouch. Writing for Tor.com in 2020, Keith DeCandido admired the execution of most of the episode and praised the amazing work of Wright, Mulgrew, and Leon, but was frustrated that Janeway's actions had no consequences. He rated the episode 4 out of 10. After considering the discussion generated in the comments underneath his review, he later acknowledged how the episode's moral dilemma generated significant conversation among the fan base when it first aired and continues to do so. I think we can all assume what happened there. In 2014, IO9's Charlie Jane Anders ranked Tuvix 56th of the top 100 episodes of the Trek franchise, and in 2015, Sci-Fi's Lisa Granshaw placed Tuvix among Voyager's top 10. So that's what the critics thought. But what did you think? And while I quickly try to find this in my phone, do you guys have any thoughts on the critical response to this? Was any of that surprising?
Surprising in that, like I mentioned, I stayed away from the debate, and finding that I am in most people's popular opinion, I thought I was singular in my opinion that it was sad to see Tuvix go. I really thought everybody was of the opposite opinion.
I think it depends. Like I said, I think there's become an awful lot of, like I said, people that just want to kind of criticize Janeway, kind of look at and use him that way. But there are people, myself included, who I think kind of miss the character and relate to him and kind of accept that it's a difficult issue without thinking that Janeway did anything wrong necessarily. So, yeah, fair enough. So I'm going to go to our audience responses. These are mostly from Facebook groups, I believe. So first of all, these are so long, sorry. From Star Trek Forever, Jess Hook says, I'm rewatching Voyager now, and it's interesting to me that this issue wasn't explored in the episode where B'Elanna is split into two people. Janeway also sort of subbed out the dead Harry, Kim, and Naomi with live ones. Very true. Corinthia Klein says, excellent episode, beautifully written and acted. I think the main thing it highlights is sometimes there is no clear answer and someone still needs to make a decision. There was going to be pain either way. Janeway made the most practical decision for the circumstances, but she didn't make it lightly. You could see the weight of it all on her face and body language. I thought it really illustrated the burden of being a captain. I think Vean would agree with that one. Let's see, Randy Allen Kaplan says they almost had Tim Russ for the whole episode. The guy playing Tuvix was recurring on Seinfeld. Thanks for that. Let's see. Betsy Barrett simply says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So again, Vean, I think, would agree with that. James Reicher was not happy with me asking this question and simply said, this has been debated over and over again and again, and in all in caps, quit beating a dead horse. It's been pulverized and rotted away. Look forward to your review of this podcast episode, I guess. Chill. Over on Instagram, Meme Space 9 said, did Janeway murder Tuvix? Yes. Was it necessary considering the situation Voyager was in? Also, yes. Back to Facebook. On Voyager fan group, David Hager said, it's an average episode. Joe Morgan said, Janeway should have been charged. Oh dear. Voyager fan group. Again, Paul Carpenter says, personally, I would have required the ship to carry a supply of the strange flower so Tuvix could visit regularly. I'm not even going to read them. Nonsense. Rick DV says Tuvok and Neelix died in a work-related accident. It was sad, yes, but a much more interesting person was created out of the two, and Janeway decided to murder them for selfish feelings instead of properly processing grief. John Luke would not have made that decision, and I don't believe Sisko would either, though he'd probably turn a blind eye to somebody else doing it. Yeah, disagree with that one. Dan Rieger just says 2 lives for 1, question mark. Yeah. Rosemary Kugler says it was intended to be a moral dilemma. Either allow Tuvix to live and sacrifice Tuvok and Neelix, or separate him, which would sacrifice Tuvix to rescue Tuvok and Neelix. There was no good option, as either demanded to sacrifice life. But Janeway had to make a choice. In fact, she was the only one who could, and in my opinion, she made the right decision. And I think Sam I Am agrees. That was him in agreement there.
It was.
Absolutely. Lock Gaskill says, the problem with the episode is that it's a very, very, very specific and very frustrating example of Janeway contradicting herself. In season 1, when facing the Vidians, she makes it clear she can't kill someone and take their parts to save another. 1 season later, she does this because she and Kes miss their friends. You want to answer that one?
Yeah, that's a stupid thing to say.
Why is it stupid? Because that one made me think, and I was like, you kind of have a point there on that one.
Because it's not the same situation. It's not remotely the same situation. It's apples and oranges. You can't compare those things.
Fair enough. Yeah, okay. Richard Standing, anyway, going back to the Voyager fan group, says, the fact that 30 years on, this is still being so hotly debated shows what a good episode it was. Personally, I think Trek is better when it raises a question for discussion rather than try to ram a viewpoint. Claire Allison Crooks, fair enough. Claire Allison Crooks says, it's funny, I doubt I'll rewatch it. Okay. Thomas Perry says, honestly, when it comes to Tuvix, he was a better officer than Tuvok and a better cook than Neelix. And at the point where they separated him, I'm pretty sure he's been on the ship for a few weeks, not just a day or two. I wouldn't have done it. Josh Spears says, I like the episode. Tom Wright did a great job playing Tuvix. Sue Rains says, it made me look at myself and realize I'm definitely not captain material. I'd have done what Janeway did, but they'd have to put me in the rubber room for 3 months afterwards. completely agree with you on that one, Sue. Likewise. Tabby Joswick, sorry if I've mispronounced that, says, for this episode, sometimes I wonder what the other captains would do. And Scotty Draven replies, the same. It was the only correct decision. Jason Schweikert says, yes, I watched it. It was a good episode. It ended. I moved on. Somebody else who's sick of the debate. Jod Y. Torelli says, I like that the Doctor actually followed his oath and refused to do harm. Other than that and some pretty flowers, maybe some character development for Kes, it's a pretty bad episode. It ruins the moral standing of everyone on the show except the Dr. Neelix and Tuvok. Disagree. Karen Conover-Lewis says Tuvix deserved to live. Janeway forced a decision that didn't need to be made in haste. Strong disagree with that one. It had been weeks, dear. Teresa Collins says, I dislike the episode. I skip it every time. I couldn't stand Tuvix, and I don't like all the moral dilemma arguments. James Phillips, on the other hand, says 5 stars, one of the best episodes. Daniel Tilson says Janeway made a hard decision, but it was the right one. Voyager needed both men at their best, not one man kind of half filling both of their roles. If she hadn't made the choice she did, Voyager might never have made it home. Over on the Red Shirts and Runabouts group, Ryan Levin just said, I think this episode did a great job of exploring an interesting and very sci-fi ethical dilemma. A lot of people give Janeway flack for her decision or joke about it, but it really was interesting and difficult. Also, while many of the crew had strong feelings about the situation, no one actually tried to stop Janeway. Tuvix was a fun character, and it was fun to see a decent fusion of Neelix and Tuvok's best traits. Where were we then? Over on Mastodon.
I have a thought. Sorry. Can I jump in there real quick?
By all means, yeah. Sorry, because people are probably sick of me talking now.
That brings up a really interesting point, especially because everybody dogpiles on Janeway murdering. Not one person, none of the male crew members stood up and said, Captain, this is wrong. Chakotay, Tom, Harry, they all said, he was on the bridge going, somebody say something, somebody.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's what that scene's there for as well, is that to emphasize that, like, yeah, nobody's jumping to you. And to that point, it's not like they wouldn't have been afraid to do it, because, again, going back to Equinox, because it's an episode I like, Chakotay does call out Janeway and go over her head and stop her from doing something that he doesn't agree with.
On many occasions he does. And in this case, he didn't. In this case, you look right at Tom Paris, who says nothing, puts his hands behind his back, you know. And I think the reason people are like, oh, it's great this is still being debated 30 years later. The reason it is still being debated 30 years later is, again, because you have a bunch of misogynists who won't stop bringing it up because they use it to bludgeon the fact that Janeway's a bad captain. She's a murderer. You know, so that's why we're still having the discussion.
To that point, you might agree with this person, Liz Barr, on Mastodon at AUS.social, says, hello, 4 points. 1, it's tedious that this is endlessly used as a stick to beat Janeway when male captains did things which were as bad or worse. 2, Tuvix was a nice guy to everyone except Kes, whose boundaries he constantly ignored. 3, Kes was well within her rights as basically next of kin to Neelix and arguably Tuvok to ask Janeway to restore them. And 4, this is one of those frustrating Star Treks that nods in the general direction of a crunchy ethical question, but isn't interested in the consequences of the outcome or good enough to justify the controversy.
I think she nailed it. I think she nailed it. Yeah.
I think I'll just end that there, because that's pretty much the mic drop moment, I think, in this. I think that has summed it up fairly perfectly for us. So I don't have anything else really to add, except to say that the time has come to add potentially a little bit of levity. It's time for my second poem, which is a limerick I have remembered. So are we ready to hear my limerick describing the plot of Tuvix?
Yes.
I really hope this was decent. I genuinely can't remember because I wrote it about 3 weeks ago. Okay. Right. My limerick for Tuvix is as follows. The transporter merges our guys. The result is a weird surprise. No more Tuvok or Neelix. Tuvik brings out some feelings, but Janeway ensures that he dies.
Oh, there's an approximate rhyme and everything.
The end. I didn't say murder, just so you know. But yeah, right. So we're just going to finish off the way we always do. Then we're going to give our favorite things and then our conclusions and scores. So I'm going to go around the table here first of all and ask for your favorite character in this and why, if you'd like to elaborate. And Vean, I'll come to you first because I'm going clockwise.
Yeah, Janeway for sure. You know, as I said earlier, Kate's acting carries the episode. It carries the show. It really ultimately comes down to the moral dilemma falling on her. She makes the right decision, and it's brilliantly portrayed by Kate Mulgrew.
What about you, Sandy? Who was your favorite character and why?
I was actually going to say Janeway as well,
You're allowed.
but less so that whether she made the right decision or not, but more so that she committed to a decision and carried that out with so much strength, and also, just carried that on her shoulders. But just also Mulgrews' acting, really, really just the performance and the pivotal role and everything just really made her my favorite here.
Awesome. My favorite character is probably going to be unpopular with at least one of you. It was actually Tuvix. I think for me, the great performance really did make me see him as an individual and genuinely care what happened to him. But that's just me. So next would be, what was your favorite moment or scene in the episode? Vean, we're back to you.
Surprisingly, I think the thing that really stands out to me is when the doctor says, "I can't do this." I think that was a really, I didn't expect it. I mean, which I guess I should have, because, first no harm, they're
yeah, if a patient doesn't want you to do something to them, you're not allowed.
So I guess, I mean, that it's perfectly rational, makes perfect sense. And I just didn't see that coming, especially because nobody else at that point had stood up and gone, "Hey, this is wrong, I can't." So for the doctor to take that position was really interesting and a very serious moment. And I think it's nice because Picardo, he does get a handful of very serious moments over the course of the show and handles them so beautifully.
Yeah, I don't think that was a moral thing so much as probably just his programming literally wouldn't allow him. It's as you said, it's Hippocratic Oath 101. A patient doesn't want you to inject him with something, you're not about to do it, really. So yeah, I didn't see it as quite as good as, for example, Latent Image, which really deals with the doctors
that's like
trying
my
to
favorite
moralize.
episode.
Oh, I love that
episode.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know why I decided to debate you about that, but yeah, I see your point with that scene. It was kind of a shocker, even though it's logical. Sandy, what about you? What was your favorite scene or moment?
My favorite scene was when Janeway was coming to her decision, and it was just her and Tuvix, and they're kind of debating back and forth. Her saying, they were two living beings, and he's like, "No, they're inside me," and she's like, "It's not the same, and I think you agree with me." And he didn't say anything, and just that debate back and forth. I'm here alive, as fortunate as it may be, they're gone. And he's saying he knows them intimately. And just that whole debate really, stuck out, because it's where we didn't really come to a good conclusion, and both of their points were valid.
Yeah, just very good point. I can't disagree with you on that. It's fantastic. I said we've already talked about this at length, but my favorite scene was the ending, because I just said it's so impactful, and debates aside, it's a powerful and affecting scene. So yeah. So do you have a favorite line that you can quote back from the episode?
I really don't think I do for this one.
That's fine. If you don't want to put one on record, we'll leave it there then. What about you, Sandy? Anything stand out?
Earlier, at what point did he become an individual and not a transporter accident? Like she was saying, if they had found this way to bring the separate beings back right when it happened, that would have been an easy decision. But because, as you mentioned, he lived with the crew for weeks and developed his own persona, his own consciousness, at what point did that happen?
Yeah, it would be another thing I wish they'd went into a little bit more, because to that point, and to kind of Janeway's point, if they had a cure straight away, Tuvix would have willingly walked back down and let her do what was done, whether you believe it's killing or not. So what in those couple of weeks changed from, oh yes, I'm an accident, we need to fix it, to no, I want to live? And I don't think it really explores it as well as it perhaps could have, which could have been interesting. But anyway, my favorite line is actually just a bit of great acting from Kate Mulgrew. I probably won't do it justice, but it's a fairly long line, and I just wanted to quote it back because I think it was really good. And it is, "When I wake up and realize it's just a dream, I'm terribly discouraged. In those moments, it's impossible to deny how far away he really is. And I know that someday I may have to accept that he isn't part of my life anymore." That was Janeway discussing her relationship with Mark as Voyager's lost in the Delta Quadrant. Kate Mulgrew's a very good actress. I recently just finished the autobiography of Captain Janeway that she narrates. Cannot recommend it strongly enough. She's incredible at that. But yeah, anyway, enough of that. We're going to move to our conclusion and our score out of 5 Starfleet Deltas. And we'll stick to the kind of clockwise way of doing this. And Vean, I'll ask you first, please, for your thoughts on this.
It's for me, I'm going to say 3 out of 5. It's not one that I would find myself going back and rewatching over and over the way I would some of the more, like for example, Latent Image or Nothing Human, or some of the ones that do pose these moral dilemmas that I think are just more enjoyable to watch, even though they're, tough to watch. This just, for me, it's just not one that I think maybe because I dislike the character. I just don't find myself going back, but I appreciate the story. And I appreciate everything it's added to fandom.
Okay, fair enough. What about you then, Sandy?
I give this one 4 out of 5. I really, really liked this episode. When I had finished watching Voyager, it was the one that stuck in my mind the most, although I will agree, hard to watch and not one I would go back and watch. In fact, I think this is only the second time I've watched this particular episode this morning in prepping, because it is hard to watch, and perhaps others dealing with similar moral issues would be more enjoyable to watch. But boy, this one just really stuck out for me, and I just appreciated what it brought to the discussions of Star Trek, the Voyager, the future, Utopia, all of those things.
Awesome. I feel bad now, but I didn't make you watch the episode. I should clarify for the audience. You volunteered. You brought this on yourself.
I did. I even took off work today to be here. That's how excited I am about this episode and this discussion. Not old to me.
We'll have to have you on a lighter episode at some point to counterbalance this. I'm going to get into my fairly long-ass conclusion, as it often is, once I can find it, and I said, when I announced this episode would be included this season of the podcast, a few people were in disbelief. It's not a bad episode, they cried. And yet it does turn up in worst episode lists. I checked. And it seems to cause strong responses that have proven aggressively divisive. All of that to me is a shame, because this is a truly fantastic episode of Star Trek. For the most part, I won't try and parse the reason for why it's become so controversial, though I'm sure misogyny, overly passionate fans, and hatred of the show all likely play their part. What I will say is that it presents a perfect trolley problems, or in Trek's terms, a Kobayashi Maru, that does make you think, stays with you, and is a truly fascinating thing to think about and discuss if we can do it calmly. Additionally, the acting is just top tier, with standout performances from Mulgrew, Leon, and guest star Wright. It's not perfect. Things get a bit too melodramatic, especially with the heavy focus on Kes. The music is particularly annoying, and at the end, it feels like a lot of behaving somewhat out of character has to happen to deliver the hard-hitting plot, but hit hard it does. It's such a shame that it wasn't explored more outside of the episode, comedy sequels notwithstanding, and it's an episode I can watch, enjoy, appreciate, and truly feel anytime. In the end, I don't really care whether Janeway was right or not. Great drama can ask questions without answering them. I just wish we could discuss those possible answers without descending into anarchy. And I liked it best of all of us, surprisingly enough. I gave it 4.5, 4.5 out of 5. I think it's a very good episode. And if you can look at it without overly passionate, aggressive, argumentative, whatever, then I think it's good. It's a lot to be considered here. So by adding these scores together and dividing by the three of us here, I get our final score for Tuvix of 3.8 out of 5 for the podcast, which is very much in the hit column if we are going just straight hit or miss, and not a bad score at all. I think we can safely say not a terrible episode. So, yeah. Any last thoughts then from either of our guests here today on this?
I just think that, unfortunately, this episode has become sort of a micro view of misogyny in fandom spaces. And I think that's really unfortunate, because if we could separate that out, you could actually have some really interesting discussions, both of the moral situation, of the acting, as we've done here. But I think, unfortunately, this episode in particular has been so inextricably linked to misogyny. It's hard to have a good faith discussion with people about it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's part of why I wanted to have at least one female voice in the episode, because I would say I don't necessarily say it as strongly as you do, but that's probably for my gender's reason. People aren't necessarily keen to throw at me that women can't be as effective in any particular situation. So I'm certainly not going to say it hasn't happened to me, but probably nowhere near as strongly as it has to you in kind of Trek fan circles, and that sucks. Yeah, fair enough. And so as we solemnly walk off, trying not to feel too depressed, I have to wrap up, as always, by thanking our guests. So again, thank you for joining us, Sandy. And do you have any way you want to shout out whether people can find you online?
Nah,
fair enough. You don't want to invite the debates about this one. So,
exactly. I hear it's ugly out there.
Yeah, fair. I'll see you back on the Discord again anyway. I know you're in there for me to chat to, so that's always handy. And what about you, Vean? Did you enjoy this? And where can people find you online if you don't mind?
Oh yeah, I always enjoy having a good faith discussion of things, especially because Mike and I never seem to agree, and yet we're still friends. So it can happen.
It's incredible, isn't it? Look at that.
Yeah, but most people can find me on Twitter, Instagram, wherever social media, at Lady Vean. That's Lady Vean.
If you do want to find us on social media, if you're watching on YouTube, I will edit in something with all of our social medias, not just that bad one. You can find us on multiple other platforms. And if you're not watching on YouTube and you're on a audio podcatcher, fear not, there will be a link tree in the episode's description that will take you through to all of my personal socials and all the ones you can reach the podcast. It's also the only way to really contact DK if you have a message for him at any point. I'm happy to pass that on, although he wasn't on this episode. You never know. Some people might want to ask his opinion on Tuvix, and he'll probably say he's not going to get into it. But anyway, yeah, please do hunt us down on there. And if you want to be a guest on the show, you want to just talk Star Trek anytime, feel free. And in the meantime, come back next week for another new episode in this divisive episodes season, as we go maybe from the sublime to the ridiculous. We're celebrating Halloween with a trip to the Enterprise D, where a bad situation has devolved and taken a turn for the monstrous. Phil Collins is not invited. So, yeah, do join us for that one. Hopefully a few of our older viewers might have gotten that joke reference. And just remember, in the meantime, we are Starfleet. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
You have been listening to the Hit or Miss Star Trek podcast, hosted by Michael Wilson, produced and edited by Mike Wilson. Please remember to like this episode and spread it throughout subspace. Subscribe to the Hit or Miss YouTube channel and follow us online. Links to all of our social media pages can be found via the link tree listed in the episode's description. For any queries or to apply to be a guest on the show, you can also email homstartrek@gmail.com. This podcast is part of the Mike's Podcasts Network. You can listen to this and our sister podcasts on all good podcast providers by searching for Mike's Podcasts. Hit or Miss Podcast was based on an idea by Michael Wilson and Will Templer. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll be back, but for now, hailing frequencies closed.
I'm gonna warp out of here at once, maximum speed.